Welcome to Ohio Roots, the official podcast of the Ohio Genealogical Society. Join us as we embark on a captivating journey through Ohio's rich genealogy, history, and abundant resources. Hosted by me, OGS Executive Director Noel Poirier, this podcast brings you insightful conversations with a diverse array of guests, from OGS members, chapter leaders, and staff to renowned genealogists, historians, and influential figures within the genealogical community. Each episode delves into fascinating topics and captivating stories. So grab your headphones, hit that play button, and join us on this enthralling journey of Ohio's roots. My guest on this episode of the OGS Ohio Roots podcast is genealogist Steve Lake. While I was conducting my own research on the 1782 Gnadenhutten massacre that occurred in my home county of Tuscarawas County, Ohio, I came across Steve's Wikitree page devoted to listing and connecting the names of those men who participated in the massacre of 92 Christian indigenous people at the Moravian village of Gnadenhutten. It's a dark page in the frontier history of Ohio, particularly when we are discussing our potential ancestors, and I wanted to learn more about Steve's project and how it got started. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Steve Lake. I'd like to welcome Steve Lake here to the OGS Ohio Roots podcast. Steve, thank you so much for taking some time to discuss the Gnadenhutten Wikitree project with me.
Glad to be here, and
Appreciate
thanks for the invitation.
Oh, no, this is exciting for me. I don't know. One thing I'm going to start with, because we start this with all of our guests, is what was it that made you get interested in pursuing your own genealogy and family history, and then in helping others?
It started when I was visiting my mother, and she had a little booklet. It was about this big.
Mm-hmm.
It said birthday book on the outside of it. And I opened it up, and it was handwritten entries of many, many relatives and their birth dates.
Yeah.
And there were also anniversaries and death dates and other things. And I said, Mom, I don't think I've ever seen this before. I'd like a copy of this. She says, well, run down to Walgreens and make a photocopy. And I said, well, it's not that big a book. I bet I can just copy it by hand. Well, it took me 4 hours. And once I got home, I started putting it in a spreadsheet. And I thought, well, a lot of these people, I don't know who they are. So I had to go back to my mom and say, how are we related to this person and that person? And then as I was putting it together, I saw there were a lot of gaps, because she wasn't comprehensive in her record keeping. And that was what took off in building the family tree and seeing where all these people fit in that complicated puzzle.
It's interesting that your story fits into something we hear a lot from genealogists and others when they give advice, which is, make sure you're talking to the living before you worry about the dead. And it sounds like in talking to your mother, it kind of got you going. And then you could talk to the dead later. Yeah,
I really lucked out, because after I completed that, and then I got on an online tree building website, I really became focused and closed and kind of in my own little cave, my own little genealogy world. And it took me a few years to finally realize that I wasn't in touch with the living, and those who could reflect on the past and give more insights. And so I made a transition, and that, of course, is what led to this, among other projects like Gnadenhutten, that I was able to find resources and information. I thought, well, this is great stuff. This ought to be out there where more people can see it.
Yeah. It's interesting. I actually stumbled on your Gnadenhutten Wikitree because I was doing research. I just finished a book about the Moravian missions in Ohio. And it was a newer book that had come out recently. And I thought, well, I want to go back and kind of revisit the Gnadenhutten massacre and take a look at that, because I saw, connections and parallels to early settlers in Ohio and what their relationships may have been at that early period, particularly here in my home county, which is Tuscarawas County. And then I found Williston's book, of course, George Williston's book or monograph that has lots of lists in there of participants and also victims. And then I stumbled across your tree because I thought to myself, in seeing Williston's book, I thought, well, why hasn't somebody done this online somewhere where we can go through all of it? And then sure enough, I stumbled upon the Gnadenhutten Wikitree. How did that start for you?
Um, I was invited to adopt a one place project. I don't know if you're familiar with those. It's not just on Wikitree. There are actually other websites that focus on that particular facet or that particular focus of genealogy study. And one place study is what it says it is. It's focused on history and culture and other details about a specific location, and then it ties individual profiles together through that common association. It's a little bit like the recent edition on Family Search that they call Other Relationships. And it, in genealogy, we're mainly concerned about blood relationships, and of course there are also the marriages, the paper relationships. But human beings are complicated people, and we connect with other human beings in many different ways through professions and careers, through neighborhoods, all sorts of things, and it introduces another interesting detail that we can add to a profile, and families and communities and cities and towns, and so when I was invited to adopt and now see, not speaking to a real person about what I thought should be pronounced Gnadenhutten.
Right, yeah.
Now I hear your pronunciation, I'm going, oh, well, that makes sense the way it's spelled.
I pronounced it differently before I moved here too, so don't worry about that.
Yeah, and to put a hard G on the front of it, like
it's more like a
connive. We don't say connive. So there are different rules about different words and different spellings. But I'll try to remember Gnadenhutten.
Well, they actually do it more of a sh. It's more of a sh. It's more of a Gnadenhutten. It's almost like an SH sound at the beginning. It's very bizarre.
The Moravian missionaries were German, so I suppose some of that came in. Okay. My mom had to correct me on pronunciation of several of her German families.
Of course.
Anyway, so it was through being invited to adopt the one place study that had a sub one place study under it, which was the massacre.
Okay.
And so the initial one was the town, the locality, and the other one was that specific historical event. And in just doing some Google searches to try to get some introductory and brief information with links to other sites that had a more complete review of the situation, I ran across Williston.
Right.
And I thought, wow, 200 names. The first idea that popped into my head was, well, I wonder how many of those 200 already have profiles on Wikitree, and I could create the links, boom, boom, boom.
Right.
And so I started through the list, and I only came up with a dozen or two.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, let's see. Are they just not any profiles on Wikitree that apply to this? Or because when you get back into the 1700s, it's really hard sometimes to pin down exact dates. And when dates vary, you wonder, is that the right person? Or is that... And well, so I started incorporating family search profiles and came up with a whole bunch more. And between the two, going back and forth, improving profiles, I think I got up to about 50.
Yeah.
And then through the progression, I was adding burial memorials and pension records, and going out to different specialized sites that helped feed information into that, and of course one of those was Fold 3, and another important one, of course, was Daughters of the American Revolution,
Right.
because their criteria, their standards for proof, really enhance the credibility of their information in their database. And so eventually I felt like I got through all 200 names that Williston suggested, and was able to place a link to his document on each of those 200 profiles on Family Search and Wikitree. And I don't think I contributed necessarily anything to find a grave burials. Quite often the burials that I did find had a Patriot Revolutionary War Service notes on it anyway, so I didn't add to that. But it took me nearly a year to kind of get through that progression, and all the peripheral stuff that fed into it.
Hi, everyone. Noel Poirier here, Executive Director of the Ohio Genealogical Society and your host for the Ohio Roots podcast. Did you know you can help preserve the past and empower the future? Your donation to the Ohio Genealogical Society helps protect vital family history records and supports research for generations to come. Visit www.ogs.org/donate and give today. Thank you so much for your support. If you enjoy listening to the Ohio Roots podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could go to whatever platform it is that you listen and give us a good review. Reviews help us get more listeners and reach more people with Ohio Roots and what we're trying to do with the Ohio Genealogical Society. So please, leave us a nice review, and thanks for listening. It kind of raises a challenge, though, and kind of a difficult challenge, I think, in that what the men did at Gnadenhutten was not patriotic, and was not it's a massacre and an atrocity. And so I'm curious how you balance, people want to know what their ancestors were doing. What's been the feedback to something like that from folks who may not want to know that their ancestor was involved in something like that?
For sure. That was one of the first things I thought. Am I doing the right thing? Am I invading space? Am I bringing bad news to people that don't want to hear it? Right. Well, I've gotten, maybe a dozen responses from the managers or primary contributors of various profiles. And the general response was positive. They were glad to know of their ancestors' connection to that historical event, bad as it was.
Sure.
And when we go into our family trees, we don't know what we're going to find.
Right,
for better
exactly.
or worse. And so the consensus I came away with was it was okay to know, even though it was a shame.
Right.
The other, and so many accounts have been written.
Right.
And I just keep running across more and more of them. And it's always interesting to hear the different varieties, the different versions, the different perspectives. And I hope someday that we'll have more information on the victims.
Yeah.
I really only ran across one name of a native that was one of the first ones to be killed. But my overall opinion was just like the American Revolution. The revolution wasn't unanimous among the colonists.
Right.
It was a vocal few that were outraged with the way they were being treated by England and especially the king, and they moved forward with their agenda, and
right.
and the silent majority were stuck for it, for better or worse.
What's
and
interesting
in this case of Gnadenhutten, I think it was just a few outspoken individuals, whether they had, and there were a few that had suffered personal loss at the hands of the natives, and they wanted revenge. Well, then there were the others that fit under more of the heading, and I hate to say this, but it's been said in the past, the only good Indian is a dead Indian.
Right.
And unfortunately, people had that attitude. And unfortunately, one of the people connected to my direct ancestor, her first husband, was, I believe, one of the ringleaders, one of the major perpetrators.
And that's what I was going to ask you about, because when I read your the Wikitree page on it, you mentioned that, and I found that fascinating, that someone who has a tangible connection. And if you are a listener and you've never read anything about the Gnadenhutten massacre, you really should, because it was violent, it was brutal, it was against children and women, and it's something that you should know about in American history. But so for you, as someone who has a direct ancestor, or an ancestor in your line who was there and active, how did that? What's the emotion that goes to that when you discover that?
Well, somewhat of a regret, but yet on the other hand, we're coached or trained to avoid extrapolating our values and our sense of right and wrong back to previous generations. Now, see, my green line goes back to a Ruhama Nichols, who was first married to a Charles Bilderback, and he was the Indian fighter that I think was one of the foremost instigators.
Yeah, I think his name comes up regularly.
Yeah, 7 or 8 years after the Gnadenhutten incident, he was captured by the Indians, and after they figured out who he was by his red hair color and some of his other characteristics and however they interrogated him, this band of a half a dozen natives decided to become judge, jury, and executioner. And tortured him to death, one finger joint, one toe joint at a time. And Ruhama, his wife, was captured at the same time and held captive in the village for, some say 9 months, some say nearly a year, before her release was arranged, and she was able to go back and be reunited with 2 young children. Along came my ancestor, John Green, who, among other things, was involved in the Zane Trace expedition. He lived in that area, I think in Virginia, not in Washington County, Pennsylvania, but he married Ruhama, adopted her 2 young children, and they together, I think, had 10 more. And it always baffled me how Ruhama was able to move right back into the same area where her husband had been captured and killed, as if it was home.
Right. It's interesting in reading the accounts of the massacre, both European and what survives in the Moravian records of the native accounts. It's interesting how many of those men, when confronted by anybody about it, said, "Well, I was one of the ones who didn't want to do it." I mean, it was a common refrain, and there's a wonderful reference. There's a wonderful reference in John Heckweller's diary where he passes through Washington County on his way home to Bethlehem, and he stays in the home of a man who he knows was at the massacre based on the way he describes the events. That there was no way he could not have been present and taken part. And I find that interesting that or even in reading what is the 1883 biographical dictionary of Washington County, and some of those names pop up as these wonderful founding fathers of Washington County. Yet they have this kind of stain I think, that goes along with that.
Yeah. Williston makes comments regarding the cover-up
Right.
and how, well, for one thing, how David Williamson was elected as their commander, even though there were other individuals present on that expedition that outranked him.
Right. Right.
And the other notes that, oh, they didn't wear their militia uniforms
No.
with their um, rank insignias.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of a black op that was not sanctioned by the chain of command. And so once the outcome happened, I think many individuals just couldn't believe that it would have been taken that far, and it was out of control. And
there certainly are. Yeah, there are certainly
they distanced themselves from it, and of course, those who had positions of influence back in Washington County, I think, coerced all the other participants to keep their mouths shut.
Right. Yeah. And that's not a surprise. It's just, I always find it with the Ohio Genealogical Society, we have First Families of Ohio, as many genealogical societies do. And I'm almost afraid to look through the list and find out which of our first family fathers might have taken part in such a thing. It's interesting. What I like about it, about what you're doing with it, and just in general, is it's out there. I mean, I found it very easily. So I appreciate that. When I went to find it, I found your Wikitree very quickly, very easily. And so it kind of forces you, if you're going to look at that family history at that period, to at least kind of come to terms with whether or not you might have been ancestrally involved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's one of the advantages of the Wikitree website is that it is open and searchable and viewable read-only to non-members, and so it's a great vehicle for collecting various research sources and putting excerpts from outside websites and including links, so people can bounce out and get a deeper dive into what they find interesting in the details. And among the various websites that deal with this subject, I tried to find a balance of how terrible it was, and yet how so many of those participants had no idea that it was going to escalate to that point, and didn't participate, whether that was true or not.
Right. So the project is an ongoing project, correct? You take in information from people, or they reach out to you. How does it work?
Occasionally I get emails, but no, I've really kind of set that on the shelf.
Okay.
I'm not actively working on it. You know how things are in genealogy. You go down a rabbit hole as far as it goes, and then what else can you do? You set it aside and wait.
Find another rabbit hole.
Yeah, find another rabbit hole. And so as I go kind of round robin, and there have been other projects, similar projects that I've worked on, and they're more or less on hold, or waiting for the next inspiration.
Well, I really enjoyed it. I'm really glad it's out there in the world. I think people need to know it's out there, particularly if you're researching family from that era who may have moved into Ohio. We will put a link to the Gnadenhutten Wikitree on the podcast episodes information, so people can get there and see it. And Steve, thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your day today to talk to me about it. I really enjoyed the conversation. I could talk about Gnadenhutten forever, but I don't want to keep you. But I appreciate you taking your time to be with us today.
Okay. Yes, you're very welcome.
Wow. I mean, there's just so much to talk about with Steve about the Gnadenhutten massacre and all that happened there and the men involved and their attitudes and approaches and perceptions of what occurred there. I literally wasn't joking. I could have talked all day with Steve about this particular story as it fascinates me personally. And I'm so happy when I ran across his website. And I'm so happy that there are other people out there who are still keeping track and recording what happened at Gnadenhutten in 1782. I want to thank Steve Lake for joining me today on the OGS Ohio Roots podcast. We will put a link to the Wikitree page that he's created on the OGS Ohio Roots podcast website. And thank you all for listening to this episode of the OGS Ohio Roots podcast. Curious about your family's Ohio past? The Ohio Genealogical Society is your gateway to uncovering generations of family history. Whether you're a seasoned researcher or just starting your journey, the OGS offers expert resources, local chapters, exclusive online records, online and in-person programs, and a passionate community ready to help you. Join today and bring your family story to life, because your family's history matters. Visit ogs.org to start your discoveries.
The Ohio Roots podcast is brought to you by the Ohio Genealogical Society, the premier gateway for discovering your Ohio family history. Hosted by OGS Executive Director Noel Poyer and edited by Luke Poyer. Theme song is Beautiful Ohio, recorded by Bob Stanley and his orchestra in 1944. To learn more about joining the Ohio Genealogical Society, visit www.ogs.org.